Today we're going to be jumping back into the Bitcoin price action. It is the weekend, so don't expect too much volatility. It would be nice for price to just kind of settle here until CME can open so we don't create a CME gap to the upside, which is something that looks like it is probably going to happen because we had closed CME at 57,800 on Friday, which is sitting down here. But having this gap down here is not bearish at all. These gaps don't need to be filled, and they certainly do not need to be filled 100% of the way. I would expect if we were to open where price currently is, since it's the weekend, these two volume levels are probably going to get respected, and I wouldn't be surprised if we just kind of stick within them, and then we could just sweep that range to the downside before continuing on up throughout the next week. But taking CME out of the equation, there is no other reason we couldn't just squeeze up right now. We are seeing more hidden bullish divergences on the 1 hour time frame. Real here locally, we got higher highs on price. Let me actually change this back to white. I was using that line to represent something we're going to talk about in a little bit, which is more of the macro scenario. We're going to be talking about those Fed rate cuts because those are real important and they are pretty much confirmed for September now. But we do see lower lows here on the RSI, higher lows on price, hidden bullish divergence pushing us up into these volume levels. And not only does that tell me that we are bullish, but if you go ahead and pull fibs, swing high, swing low, these are where you would find resistance on the fibs. We have flipped this golden pocket of resistance into support now. So the flip of this into support with those 1 hour hidden bullish divergences is a very bullish sign to see. I would not be surprised at all if we go ahead and do the breakout very, very soon here. But as I said, it is the weekend, so don't be surprised if we do just chop within here, come down, sweep, then go. Something like that. Very hard to predict what's going to happen with this low volume, but the charts are certainly shaping up for a breakout to the upside, finally launching us out of this range in the very near term future. Although, as I've been saying, nothing is confirmed quite yet. We still need to break this, flip it into support, and continue on up to these higher levels, because this once again is still just a bearish backtest of this entire range we've been in, just backtesting that value area low before the continuation down lower. And while I certainly don't think that's what's going to happen, I do have to say it is possible, especially because what the S&P is doing. We do have a good high here on the S&P. Everything on this chart does say to sell with those 1 hour, 4 hour bearish divergences, and even on the weekly time frame, we do have somewhat of a weekly bear div coming in there. But I will say this RSI is looking pretty strong on the weekly. This is almost invalidated, so we'll see if this confirms or not going into next week. Next week, in my opinion, will be a telltale sign of where the markets are going to go, especially with the Russell. Is this going to be a swing failure of these previous highs? We can go ahead and put a sweep level right there, or are we going to hold this as support and continue on up higher, or are we going to go ahead and accept this previous bull market range back into support? Taking simple horizontal lines within here, you can see that's a nice value area low to look at, and that is sitting pretty far beneath us. So even if we did swing fail this, we still have plenty of support that can be bullishly retested. You certainly would expect imbalances like this to get filled at least somewhat. So let's see if we can get this pullback and hold the range back into support. Confirming this range will send altcoins to the absolute moon, in my opinion, because the Russell going does signal risk on for the stock market. I have no reason to believe it wouldn't also signal risk on for the altcoin market, which is also looking very, very bullish right now after sweeping these lows, making a fractal very similar to back in 2020, which we've talked about a lot on this channel, so I won't rehash it in this video. But yeah, total 3 still looking very, very good. Now let's go ahead and look at Bitcoin on Trading Light, so we can go ahead and see what's going on with the TPO profiles, what I kind of want to focus on today. We talked about how CME closed at 57,800, so we would be making a CME gap wherever we do end off going into Monday. And if we did come down to fill 50% of this gap, that actually lands us right at the bottom of these single prints, these imbalances on the 30-minute candles that we also had in today's session. So right within here is a big level to be watching to hold. This would make a lot of sense for a pullback, assuming we do get one. This would be for Monday, Tuesday, not necessarily something that's going to happen over the weekend, but if it did, that also works out too. If we can just kind of open down here, that is completely viable too, and that tells us that we don't need to go down any lower to fill any CME gaps. But if we do go down lower, there's actually another level down here that makes a lot of sense for a bullish correction too. That is going to be this sweep level. Let me change this to the dashed line, which is what I use for sweep levels. That's going to be this poor low on the TPO profile. You can see there are no single prints below these wicks on the daily session. creating a nice sweep level that we could go ahead and grab. So something like this could happen during the weekend. Maybe we come up here, maybe we just open up right there. There's a lot of different possibilities, but yeah, this whole box in here makes sense for a bullish pullback. So even though we do have those hidden bull divs on the chart right now, we did flip this golden pocket into support, and I do think it is likely we could just squeeze on up here and go for the 64.5 level sooner rather than later. I'm not really necessarily saying to FOMO long right here. That's probably not the best idea. We still have liquidity and a potential CME gap below us, so just letting you guys know that. But let's go ahead and jump out of the Bitcoin price action here in the short term and talk about the Fed rate cuts, because that is pretty much confirmed for September at this point. 90% chance of rate cuts from CME Group. They are extremely accurate on predicting these. It's essentially confirmed at this point. September is when Jerome Powell is going to be cutting those rates. We don't have to worry about it for July. Over a 90% chance that they're still staying paused, but certainly September is going to be the big month. We're probably going to see mass euphoria leading up into September. The markets are probably going to go pretty parabolic, but this is not the time to be a moon boy and get overly euphoric and get overly bullish, because historically these rate cuts have marked macro tops in the market, as we see right here. So what I've done here is put the United States interest rates at the bottom. The Russell is in yellow, Bitcoin is in orange, and the S&P 500 is in cyan blue up there at the top. And each one of these vertical lines represents when they have started cutting and then once they stopped cutting. So as we see all the way back in 2000, the S&P actually topped a couple months before they started the rate cuts. After the cuts started, the cutting cycle was extremely bearish for markets. We continued the downtrend up until they started slowing down their cutting cycle, and we do see them cut one more time after the market had already reversed, and the market continues to trend up through a hiking cycle, through a pausing cycle, and then the start of the next cutting cycle signals the top in the S&P, but the S&P does not top out this time before rate cuts. It tops out 2 months after they start cutting rates. So could we see a very similar thing happen this time around? I think it's very probable, especially with election season coming up. If they do cut in September, why not push it out to November so they can have euphoria in the markets through election season? So big money could potentially use the markets to persuade the public that the times are good and to keep the candidate in office that they want to keep in office. So that's a big possibility right there. The S&P runs until November. So does that mean that we have until November on Bitcoin? And not necessarily, because even if the S&P continues to run, we saw last cycle the S&P actually topped about 2 months after Bitcoin did. So if it's like that, well, then maybe Bitcoin tops in September, but the S&P continues to run to November. But of course, we just don't really know. This is very uncharted territory. Bitcoin has never been through a true hiking cycle like we are in right now. Yes, we had a small hiking cycle before COVID, and then we went through a cutting cycle for COVID. We saw a small, bear market rally and correction there before the big bull market we saw in 2020. While rates were pretty much at zero, and then we saw an aggressive sell-off on all risk-on assets, including the S&P, after this aggressive hiking cycle had started. But we've never seen cutting after an aggressive hiking cycle for Bitcoin, so truly uncharted territories. Once again, we do see Bitcoin coming down while the S&P is continuing up. So could the top already be in for Bitcoin? Could we actually top out before the cutting cycle this time and it's more similar to 2000? Yeah, it's certainly a possibility, but I'm still hedging my bets that we do rally here going into the cutting cycle, and I do think there's a good chance that Bitcoin runs along with the stock market until November. With those ETFs, they're kind of more correlated than ever, so I would not be surprised for them to just kind of top out at the same month, the same week this time around. But once again, timing this stuff just based on interest rates is pretty vague. The main point I want to get across here is that when we do start the cutting cycle, it is not time to be bullish in the markets. It's time to start looking to potentially sell into that euphoria when everybody thinks that the markets are going to be bullish now because the Fed is cutting rates. No, historically, that's the opposite of what happens. Every time we start a cutting cycle, we start the downtrend into the bear market, and the bear market doesn't bottom until rates go all the way back to zero. And historically, the degree of these downtrends when the Fed does start cutting rates is in between 65 and 70 degrees. So what I've gone ahead and done here is drawn a 67-degree downtrend to kind of estimate where the market would finally bottom after we have this downtrend. And once again, very vague, just a rough estimate, but we could potentially have a bear market from September 2024 to August of 2026. Completely the opposite of what most retail thinks right now, where they believe that 2025 will be the most bullish year of the decade, whereas the data suggests otherwise, especially when you do look at something like unemployment rates. This is a very scary chart right now. Every time unemployment rate crosses these EMAs does signal big recessions, such as the end of 2007 and 2000. So I wanted to go ahead and cover this since we do have such a guarantee now that September will be when the Fed is cutting rates, and just to give some things to look out for and to give some possibilities of what could happen. But of course, none of this is definitive. We are truly in uncharted territories, especially when it does come to crypto, Bitcoin during these times. Could it decorrelate from risk on and become a safe haven asset like gold? We really don't know, but just based off the short amount of data we can backtest, it does suggest that Bitcoin will continue to correlate with the stock market and that Fed rate cuts are not a bullish thing for Bitcoin. But if you do have any questions about anything I talked about or just want to join the community for this channel, link to my Discord is in the description down below. I also have a VIP Discord called the Crypto Eagles. If you want to learn more about that, just join the regular Discord and you'll see a VIP channel. You can watch a YouTube video I have explaining all of that. Also, you can just click that VIP link and it gives bullet points of all of the benefits you get of joining that group, mainly for leverage traders. So I have that, and then also I'm running an event right now with BingX if you want to get some awesome rewards on a great exchange such as deposit bonuses. Basically, you can get a free $50, so make sure to go check that out as well. And with that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.